fired up! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the mothership of all things feminism. This is Fired Up, a podcast that celebrates women who are fearless in the pursuit of what sets their soul on fire. Women who break the mold and dare to dream. Grab a seat and take your place in a safe space for bold conversations on charting our own path. Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Fired Up. I'm your host, Sheila Bett. For those just joining in, Fired Up was actually birthed in a completely different podcast, the Square Pegs podcast. So that's why we start from season 2. Season 1 was originally part of the Square Pegs podcast and came as a natural progression in finding the direction that this podcast would eventually take. Take a shot for every single time that I say the word podcast. Anyway, we landed safely on feminism. If you've caught up with previous episodes, you might have noticed that when I was on my journey to debunk myths and misconceptions around feminism, on part 3 of the F Word series to be specific, the one where I talk about feminism today, I kind of hit a brick wall. I had come across opinions, narratives, and perspectives that completely challenged my idea of what feminism is all about. It had become so convoluted that I wondered if my understanding of the word would be able to stand against the popular idea that it had now become. So the pain point that had led me to create this series in the first place was something that was now slowly being disintegrated. And I started to wonder whether I actually believed in the things that I had initially believed in, or if they actually made sense anymore. So my mission was to basically create a greater understanding of what the real values and principles of feminism are, what it stands for, what it seeks to gain. And in the process of trying to create this understanding, I came to understand why there was such a confusion or a misunderstanding of the F word or feminism in the first place. So here we are on the second season of a long journey that will highlight more of the positive aspects of this wonderful movement that has actually brought a lot of positive change into the world that we know today. So now that you're caught up, let's explore the role of gender roles, or lack thereof, in a feminist household. My first recollection of how the larger society perceived gender roles occurred to me much later in life. I was either in high school or just out. During the long weekend, we stayed at our aunt's house along with our cousins of the same age range. The kids are majority boys, so just one sister among them for context. So one evening, as we peeled potatoes to prepare for dinner, the eldest cousin demanded that his sister prepare him a peanut butter and jam sandwich. I was appalled by this unreasonable request. Never mind that we were all busy peeling potatoes while he had his feet up in the air. I called it out immediately, but I also realized that this was in fact a thing that happened often. See, I grew up in a home full of girls. My dad was mostly the only male around, and even he didn't seem allergic to the idea of doing household chores. In fact, when we were very young, my mom lived out of town and we lived with my dad alone because of her job posting. My dad would cook us dinner on school nights when he got back from home. And we'd help out with the dishes, but for a long time, he did most of the household chores because we didn't have a nanny to do the care work. He hardly cooked once my mom moved in, but I never really saw it as her exclusive duty because my dad had already done these things for us before. As I grew up, it became apparent to me that later in life, I would only fit into a household that held feminist values and principles. So what are these ideals, you ask? Pretty simple. We all have the ability to contribute to the smooth running of the home and fill in gaps to make sure everyone is comfortable and no one feels overworked or underappreciated. It's the obvious recipe for a happy, peaceful, and harmonious home. The more I interacted with others, the less I saw a reflection of these values. Even the most reasonable people seemed to subscribe to traditional roles of men and women and have a rather rigid take on this, especially in romantic relationships. Men who were great or decent enough at cooking would vehemently argue against doing most of the cooking at home. It was suddenly a thing that would emasculate them. Some were happy to cook occasionally during the dating phase, and then as things started to settle down in the relationship, they would suddenly develop this amnesia around household duties and such. In fact, some of these rigid and impractical attitudes would often lead to young men in learning institutions dating a girl just to have access to a free domestic servant. Now, I wouldn't insist that we all equally contribute. Each couple has the right to decide how they run their household or their day-to-day living. In some cases, the woman naturally falls into more domestic roles or just prefers to be in charge at home. Perhaps she's particular about how to get things done and would rather not dictate this to her partner or feel the need to redo a task that was seemingly completed. I've also come across men who are very neat and tidy and the female partner is the opposite but compliments him in other ways. In my ideal situation, we would cook together. So one of us would be chopping up the ingredients while the other one did the cooking. Ideally, the one who's more savvy at following recipes or concocting them. There would be music playing in the background as we engaged in lively banter and caught up on each other's day. It would be a beautiful bonding experience. Once we were done with a meal, either of us would offer to do dishes or we'd tackle it together to make things go faster. So what do parenting strategies look like in a feminist household? In most traditional homes or families, the man is the sole provider and the woman is the homemaker. In modern times, this varies, but it's still common to find that even in a two-income household, the man bears the greater burden of providing while the woman carries the running of the entire household on her shoulders. This sometimes translates in neither party pulling their weight to support the other, even when this is a possibility. I've heard the craziest stories. You know that saying that truth is stranger than fiction? Well, a friend once told me about a woman who was her friend's colleague. She had an illustrious career, which sometimes included getting paid in bonuses or commissions. Because she held such strong traditional beliefs about the man of the house having to be the breadwinner, she kept her money to herself. They led a rather humble lifestyle because she didn't chip in to raise the status of the household. She was perfectly capable of it. To take things further down the cuckoo route, she hid her money from her husband, pretending to earn a lot less than she actually did. Now, I can't verify the truth of this part, but she met an untimely death, and upon her death, a lot of money was found in a safe in her office. The husband was shocked to learn that they were not doing badly at all. This money only got to him and their children when she died. They could have lived a very different life if she was honest about her earnings and willing to support her own family the best way she could. Most of us would find this ridiculous, right? How could she sacrifice living an authentic life that is much more abundant merely based on the belief that her role is to do anything but provide? Conversely, I see how some would imagine that a feminist household would lean on the other extreme, where both the wife and husband must earn and or contribute equally to the household, both financially and in the day-to-day running of the home. For some, this might work perfectly. They could choose to delegate tasks like cleaning, cooking, and laundry in equal measure. But how I see it, each person contributes in the way that most naturally suits them, regardless of how that role is perceived by society vis-a-vis gender. Like in the story I just told, the lady could have easily held the fort in the home financially, as long as that didn't mean that the man slacked in this and other areas. They could have easily balanced the contributions each makes to make their household as efficient and harmonious as possible. Maybe he had a less demanding job in terms of time and would take on school meetings, pickups and drop-offs, or help the kids with homework and so on. I believe that a feminist household in the same vein could have the man as the provider, if that is what suits him best. That is to mean he earns significantly more. A feminist mom can stay at home and run the house, pay the bills, follow up on repairs, and so on. She might even decide to homeschool, which is something that's becoming more and more common nowadays. Both are playing a major role in the running of their home or the thriving of their family life. No one is superior to the other. It is a partnership. The diversity of how feminist homes are run can vary from one family to the next. The most important thing is that the couple are on the same page and hold similar values, as in any healthy relationship Key ingredients would be trust, goodwill towards each other, and the goal of creating a safe and healthy environment where everybody feels appreciated, loved, and provided for. How this distribution happens will depend on the strengths of each party. Both are willing to play their part, and they ideally complement each other in practical ways that ensure the best outcome for the entire household. If you choose to run a home that espouses feminist principles and values, there will be some challenges. Some may even occur within the household as you try to merge new ideas with the very sticky old school ones that are slowly starting to lose their grip. A great place to start is, of course, that you are both willing to build on this and there's no military approach to how things are done. Some of the traditional roles will actually occur because they are practical. There was a valid reason why these were normalized in the first place. Taking out the garbage, heavy lifting, slightly risky tasks around the home like going on a ladder to set the bulb or putting away big heavy suitcases. These could end up falling on the man as he is more likely to be taller, bigger, stronger even. Of course, there are always exceptions. We don't live in a fantasy world. I won't pretend to be a muscle-covered strong man. I happen to be on the slender side, and though I can lift a heavy item or two and even twist a new jar open, sometimes my narrow wrists start to hurt, and I hand the jar over to my husband. I won't twist my wrist to prove a silly point. We can help each other out and still espouse feminist ideals. No need to be petty. Don't get me wrong, this is not to say that you shouldn't make an effort to have a decent level of independence. If I need to change light bulbs or carry a 20-liter bottle into the house, maybe my partner isn't around. It's empowering to know that I can. But I can also ask for help when it's an easier solution and a way to avoid injury. As an adult, male or female, you should try to do as much as you can to be self-sufficient, but you don't have to. We are social beings for a reason. When the environment you're in frowns upon those who don't do things differently, this may be a challenge for the family that chooses to shun impractical or unhelpful traditional norms. When my husband and I were starting to date, I lived in a neighborhood whose population was mostly local, that is to mean Kenyan. He naturally took up the garbage duty when visiting. The men who worked in the compound would sometimes point and chuckle about it. It was unusual for them to see this. Ignoring the undue attention is just one of the ways that we adapt, those of us who choose to do things differently. So maybe your boyfriend is happy to hold your purse while you fix your shoelaces. Some might see him as a wuss, but that's none of their business. Or yours. Trying to live your life to impress strangers, even family, is an uphill task that will only make you miserable. Live life on your own terms. So what are some of the ways that you can begin to adapt feminist values in your family's day-to-day life? I think a good place to start is to have an honest conversation of your expectations and needs. When these are laid out on the table, you can begin to narrow down to what each of you is able to offer to make things run smoothly and to ensure that neither party feels weighed down by what they are currently taking on. It would also help to see how your strengths and weaknesses as a couple complement each other. When the conversation is had with a spirit of wanting to be helpful and wanting the best for each other, you can't go wrong with the little steps you take towards that goal. A new mother may need to be made as comfortable as possible as she caters to a very needy child. If you're able to hire help to focus on this task and she's eating well and getting enough rest, the baby gets a patient and loving mother who can cater to their needs from a place of abundance. So, do you consider your household a feminist household, or do you consider it to be more traditional? Share that in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and what that looks like, whether it's from the feminist side or the traditional side. Until next time, you've been listening to Fired Up, and I've been your host, Sheila Bett. Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of the Square Pegs podcast. I am Sheila Bett. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm still getting used to this whole new podcast. Okay, let's go again. Let's get it started. Let's get it started. Final take 3.